Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to introduce our first speaker for today. Our first speaker is Dr. Myrtle Hill. Dr. Hill was formerly Senior Lecturer at the School of Sociology, Social Policy and Social Work at Queen's University, Belfast. Previously Director of the Centre for Women's Studies. She specialises in history, gender studies, disability studies and approaches to the Northern Ireland conflict. Her research has focused on social, religious and gender history in Ireland, and she has published widely in these areas. Dr. Hill has written widely on the theme of evangelism and is perhaps best known for her Evangelical Protestantism in Ulster Society 1740 to 1890, which she wrote with Dr. David Hampton, and which was published in 1992. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Hill, and we really look forward to your presentation.
Okay, good morning everybody. Good to see you. Thank you to both federations for the invitation. It's lovely to come down here. I thought I was coming after Mary, and so that there's some, obviously, relationship between what we're saying. So I do hope what I'm saying makes sufficient sense to you. In exploring the position of women in the north of Ireland during a period of social and political turbulence, this paper is going to focus on their engagement in a range of campaigns: nationalism, unionism, suffrage, pacifism and post-war politics. While a feminist approach to history often, perhaps inevitably, highlights the experiences of a number of individuals, strong-minded women who have left some kind of record of their lives, these serve only as examples of a much greater number of activists, and moreover, their concerns throw light on many aspects of everyday life which do not deserve to be confined to the sidelines of history. So sometimes we've got to look underneath and a bit indirectly to get the stories we need to hear. What I'm most keen to stress this morning is the diversity of aspirations and experiences as women in the north both responded and contributed to local, national and indeed international events. Start with nationalism, because as we know, the political arena was of course dominated by the issue of the Home Rule Bill making its way through Parliament. And nationalist and unionist women, like their men, organised themselves in support or rejection of legislation which would determine the course of modern Irish history. Nationalist associations such as the Ladies Auxiliary of the Ancient Order of Hibernians and Cún na Bhean were well represented in the north. Indeed, Maria Luddy described the Belfast branch of the latter, founded by Winifred Carney, who we see up here, as one of the most military aggressive in Ireland, and there's lots of stories about Winifred engaging in shooting competitions with her male colleagues and so forth. Nor was the cultural revival neglected. At the turn of the century, there were 26 branches of the Gaelic League in Belfast, and women were particularly to the fore in this movement. For example, ardent Protestant nationalist Alice Milligan. There's a lot of really interesting stuff on Alice at the moment, and I'm so glad that she's been brought to the forefront of centenaries. Alice Milligan founded branches of the Irish Women's Association in 1894, and with Anna Johnson, who wrote as Ethna Carberry, edited two nationalist publications in the 1890s, The Northern Patriot and Shanbango. Indeed, Catherine Morris argues that Milligan put the north on the map of the Irish cultural revival and provided a new resonance to Irish visual culture. And again, it's important to know that, you know, beneath, if you like, I don't mean in a hierarchical way, but behind these leaders and these innovators were masses of people who began to enjoy and appreciate a different engagement with the nation which was currently undergoing such vital negotiations. On the other side of the political divide, women also responded to the heightened tensions of the time. The Association of Loyal Orange Women underwent a revival at the end of 1911, and within 8 years had 12 female lodges, 10 of them in Belfast, and again an opportunity for celebrations of all kinds. However, the main forum for women of all classes during this period was the Ulster Women's Unionist Council, founded in 1911 to consolidate female opposition to Home Rule. This had largely upper-class leadership, but really those involved in the movement went around the back streets of Belfast, getting women to show their support for opposition to Home Rule. And it's seen as one of the biggest, certainly the biggest female unionist organisation of its time. And again, providing an outlet for people of all classes. You see them up here signing a declaration in support of the Ulster Covenant on 28th of September 1912. And that was signed by almost 235,000 women. So again, a really significant occasion for women of all classes. That signing reflected their determination and their strong belief that this was an issue of vital interest to council members. As a council member, a Lurgan council member explained, I'm so glad you're here, Mary. Home Rule was emphatically a woman's question. They said, let each woman in Ulster do a woman's part to stem the tide of Home Rule. The Union meant everything to them, their civil and religious liberty, and their homes and their children. The home was a woman's first consideration. In the event of Home Rule being granted, the sanctity and happiness of home life in Ulster would be permanently destroyed. And what you can see here is the very stereotypical understanding that the hand that rocked the cradle ruled the world. And this kind of maternalism was very much a part of unionist discourse. James Craig called this association the motherhood of Ulster. And tensions amongst men and women had been heightened by the Papal Decree of 1907, which stated that children born in a mixed marriage should be brought up Catholic. Traditional maternalism underlay the intensive propaganda campaigns against England and Scotland, undertaken by mostly the middle and upper class members of this organisation. Their discourse, as well as being focused on motherhood, was also very much, I really only noticed this when I was rereading stuff the other day, around the concept of empire. So again, you can see how these women are reinforcing why the British link is so important to them, keeping the Catholic Church from the home and family and being a part of that great industrial empire. Of course, alongside this political activity, women of the Ulster Volunteers Force were, in a very practical way, training for the expected civil war as dispatch drivers, UVF nurses, and so forth. So there are a lot of things going on both sides of that political divide. But other politicised women strove to unite these opposing forces, to bring women of all political persuasions together in a campaign to win the female franchise. And this cause needs to be seen in the context of the progressive broadening of the male franchise and of women's increasing participation in other aspects of life. And as with all of these things, there's another whole series of histories that bring us to this point. As Mrs. Cope of our Mass Suffrage Society argued, it seems to me imperative that all women of whatever political party should now stand for a great principle, the principle that no democratic government can be considered complete which ignores not only a class, which of course is what all the reform bills were doing, but a whole sex. Prime Minister Asquith claimed that suffragettes twittered like sparrows. And and they were both verbally and physically abused by male and female opponents alike. However, even a brief survey of the Irish suffrage paper, The Irish Citizen, reveals the breadth of their concerns. Education, working conditions, infant and maternal mortality, temperance, sanitary reform, sexual double standards, violence against women, and the consequent need to have them sit on juries. This was not an abstract, theoretical idea. The response of the wider public to suffrage activities, however, was largely one of indifference. And as one suffragist's daughter noted, it was frequently a response of ridicule. And she quoted a popular song of the period. "My ma's a suffragette, she wears a collarette marching up and down with her bloomers hanging down. My ma's a suffragette." And she recalls an embarrassing incident during a family holiday at Portmuck. Didn't think that was the one I had there. Did you just put the next one on for me, John? Yeah. No, sorry. Go back again. There seems to be a mix-up in my slides. Never mind. Just go back? No, back. Yeah, well, you can see what's happening here. She recalls an embarrassing incident during a family holiday at Portmuck, when at a crowded regatta, her mother and a friend leaped onto the stage during a lull in the proceedings and unfurled a suffrage banner. She said, "I don't think they'd even time to speak before 2 or 3 men who had a little too much to drink dragged them off the platform and chased them into the sea. My father and some of the fishermen had to wade in after them to save them from a ducking. At least if they didn't get their message across, they got a lot of publicity." And that, of course, was the point. The rejection of suffrage was one point on which the male leaders of the ongoing constitutional debate agreed, and led to growing frustration within the movement, particularly in Belfast. And this was reflected by stone-throwing incidents and attacks on pillar boxes and on rural post offices. And this is just a cartoon of the time. This is actually London in 1911, when 2 Belfast women went over to join Mrs. Pankhurst's Women's Social and Political Union in a protest. And we have here Mrs. Elizabeth Bell, who's now is one of the first female physicians in Ireland, and Margaret Robinson of Whitehead Suffrage Society. And you can see how they're being portrayed here and undermined in what for them was a very serious matter. This all really came to a head, however, as a result of uncertainty over those vital local political negotiations. In September 1913, the publication of a letter from a senior unionist official indicated that plans were being drawn up for a provisional government in the North East, which included granting the franchise to women, and you can imagine the excitement that this caused. So when some months later Carson made it clear that this was not in fact the case and he had no intention of giving the vote to women, the suffragettes declared war on unionism. Mrs. Pankhurst sent delegates over to Belfast, and the enthusiasm of some members for the heightened militant zeal which followed caused a great deal of friction and indeed division in the local suffrage community. Stone throwing was only one tactic employed. Suffragettes now focused their attention and their anger on the symbols of unionism, verbally harassing individual leaders, infiltrating UVF displays, damaging recreational facilities, and mounting arson attacks on unionist-owned buildings. 13 suffragettes were imprisoned in the 6-month period. It's a very exciting time and worth an entire lecture on its own, but you're not getting it just now. So 13 suffragists imprisoned in a 6-month period, and while they objected to women's slavish adherence to Irish nationalism, suffragettes were in turn denounced as mad women and were subjected to both verbal and physical abuse. Mrs. McCoubrey, who I've been doing some particular research on, who was a suffragette who lived on the Orme Road in Belfast. Her daughter wrote memoirs about her, and here she describes the experience of being under surveillance with detectives following her everywhere she went. I'll not take the time to read it now, but it talks about the cake shop in Donegal Square, where they used the big cake boxes to carry dynamite and so forth. This is the cake shop here, Carson's Cake Shop. Some of my students have said about their parents knowing it very well, and so forth. It was in Royal Avenue in Belfast. And so McCoubry and members of the London WSPU and other suffragists, thank you very much, I've been talking too much this week, would have met there and discussed their plans for carrying out their militant activities. The big house at White Abbey was probably the most famous building that was destroyed at this time. But what is important to acknowledge here, having looked at those three groupings, is the multi-layered nature of political identity, the diverse, multifaceted and dynamic nature of Northern Irish women's relationship to the state. The outbreak of war saw shifting priorities and the realignment of loyalties. Leading suffragists went against the grain with a pacifist stance, but their attempt to attend an international mediation meeting at The Hague was foiled, both by the closure of shipping lanes and by the government's refusal to grant visas. The meeting that they were unable to attend, in fact, resulted in the founding of the International Committee of Women for Permanent Peace, which remains a very significant body. Local female opposition to war was thus largely confined to speeches, debates, and taking in Belgian refugees. Although Belfast's Margaret McCoubry, she actually lent her support to the Glasgow-based left-wing Women's Peace Crusade, declaring her intention of holding a month-long campaign in London. Very interesting crusade, very much a Labour socialist organisation, which I only discovered a year or so. But Margaret's intention seems to have been foiled. The only mention in the local press revealed the strength of public antipathy. Under the heading, The Aborted Peace Crusade at Bangor, this report was written by the Irish News. Again, I'll not take up our time this morning to read it out. You can look at it there and we can come back to it if you like. But basically, they were marched off by a soldier who arrived and harangued the crowd for listening to this kind of propaganda as he saw it. McCoubry's daughter Elizabeth was then 10 years old and remembered being taunted as German spies and traitors by an angry crowd, which chased her, her mother, father and another suffragette back to the train station. So not much sympathy there. It was obviously not a popular position, particularly in the north. Patriotism was to the fore. With women engaged in recruitment drives and encouraged to support the participation of their men in the front line in Europe. And we're all familiar with this kind of propaganda aimed very much at women. You can see here at the top it's women on one of the recruitment drives. Do you realise that the one word go from you may send another man to fight for Ireland? When the war is over and your husband or son is asked, what did you do in the Great War? Is he to hang his head because you wouldn't let him go? In a reminder of the local context, Winifred Campbell, who lived in Belfast Shankle Road, recalled how when her father, a dispatch clerk in an export firm, enlisted, his wife strongly disapproved, as she believed he should stay at home to do his bit to defend Ireland from the threat of Home Rule. And that kind of anxiety and division of loyalties was quite widespread. Campbell goes on to describe the quality of family life in her home during the war. The army allowance was scarcely adequate, and soldiers' wives were hard-pressed to cope. There were plenty of voluntary committees, sewing circles and the like, all working to provide comforts for the troops, but very little practical help for their families. The factories and foundries were flourishing, and there was plenty of money to be made by those who stayed at home. But we had quite a struggle, and the comparison made Mother resentful. Nevertheless, she refused to ask for or accept anything that savoured of charity. The Ulster Women's Unionist Association was already well prepared, of course, for civil war, so they switched their focus and adapted their strategies to deal with the new situation. I'm particularly looking at the UVF nurses here, who raised £1,440 for financing and equipping a hospital in Pau in southwest France, originally established by the Tyrone Nursing Corps. And this was managed by two Strabane women, Mrs. Sinclair and Valentine. A majority of women redirected their energies to focus on the needs of the troops making their way to the front. Most middle-class females, well rehearsed by church-based activities, heartily embraced voluntary work. Lots of knitting, the gathering of sphagnous moss, and lots of fundraising. The Ulster Women's Gift Fund, for example, had raised almost $192,000 by the end of the war. Also, as the local male workforce was depleted, women were encouraged to take new roles on the land and transport, learning new skills, or as here in the munitions factory and so forth. All of these, as we know, regarded as temporary emergency measures, with no accommodation made for the care of children or older family members. It was expected that women would do a kind of shift work, and that neighbours or other members of the family would look after the children. And this is where you really see the call for some kind of nurseries to be brought in, but with very little success at this stage. As the war continued, female participation became not only increasingly accepted, but officially organised. Here we have Lady Londonderry, who in 1915 formed the Women's Legion, and these are some members of the Women's Legion at that stage. At first it was just to act as cooks and so forth, but the aim was for them to take the place of men required for active service. I found it interesting that Lady Londonderry was careful to ensure that boundaries separating male and female expectations were not crossed. All right, women could do men jobs, but she claimed that her organisation was made up of women who were, quote, not Amazons or of masculine appearance, but lovely girls who benefited from the effect of regular work and wearing sensible clothes and thick shoes. And that was very important in gaining recognition for her organisation. We also, of course, had Nursing Corps. The Queen Alexander Nursing Corps was part of the British Expeditionary Force at the front. Voluntary auxiliary detachment nurses, again the story of Emma Duffin helps us to see their experience. The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, founded in 1916, the Wrens, and then the Women's Royal Air Force. So a changing perception of what women can or can't do, at least temporarily. Against the background of international war, news of the Easter Rising in Dublin added to local tensions. And with most of the information coming from London, this led to considerable confusion and anxiety. The North largely escaped the fighting, but as with other aspects of the insurgents, this was not as originally planned. A Belfast contingent travelled to Tyrone on Easter Saturday, 132 men and 6 Cumann and women. To link with others in Coal Island, they were then to head to Galway to fight. Following McNeill's counter-command, the women felt they couldn't proceed, without Tyrone, and the men there refused to go. They went home. But Carney and Co, Winifred Carney was one of these women. They carried on to Dublin. Connolly apparently telling his daughter later that if they hadn't arrived and told him that there were people in the north willing to fight, he wouldn't have gone ahead. The 1916 rising, which I imagine Mary's going to talk more about, of course deepened divisions, and the widening gulf in Ireland continued to grow. The Somme and the disaster of the Somme also added to this historical relegating of sides, British and Irish. Many personal tragedies, of which we've heard many during these centenary years. 5,500 men of the Ulster Division were killed or wounded in the first 2 days. 17-year-old Herbert Beattie said, "Dear mother, tell them there is not another Grosvenor Road fellow left but myself. Mother, we were tramping over the dead. I think there's only about 400 left out of about 1,300. Mother, if God spares me to get home safe, I will have something awful to tell you. If hell is any worse, I would not like to go to it." That 12th of July afternoon, traffic was at a standstill, all work suspended, and the city of Belfast shrouded in deep silence. The Belfast Telegraph noted that neither the Boyne nor Thiepval, the scene of the most glorious achievements in the present war, was forgotten in the sorrow-stricken city of Belfast. Although the impact was less dramatic, women too, of course, died in the course of duty, as evidenced by the 18 sisters and staff nurses of the Queen Alexandra Nursing Corps, remembered in St Anne's Cathedral, Belfast. And of course there were indeed many others whose names we don't have. I want to just point you to this little book, which I have found absolutely brilliant. It being so difficult to get information about ordinary people. This is the memoirs, the collection of letters of a woman called Rosamond Jacob, who was a kind of Anglican missionary who came up from Dublin to Belfast Shankill Road. What her aim was to encourage men to join the army. And she was very scathing of anyone who didn't. Very scathing of a lot of things. And I certainly don't concur with a lot of things that she said. But she goes in and out of all the little backstreet houses, telling us what's going on. And she gives a brilliant portrayal of VE Day in Belfast. But the kind of thing that she notes, which is a wee bit grim, let's see if I can just find it here. She's going around the back streets saying how everybody feels about the end of the war. So then I went on to old Mrs. Whelan, and she said, "Oh, when were the prisoners coming home?" And it was very grim, because I know she expects her Tim to be with them, in spite of the war, saying that he's dead. And then I went to Mrs. Rice, and she sat by the fire saying, "I'm very glad, I'm very glad." And really, she didn't care 2 straws, because her only was killed in action, and Joe's in a lunatic asylum with shell shock. So a woman without great compassion or sympathy, perhaps, but she tells us, and you get real glimpses, graphic glimpses, as wounded men sit around the fireside and families try to cope in sometimes terrible circumstances. Okay, post-war. 1916 didn't, of course, bring immediate victory to the leaders of the rising, but in the aftermath of war, the results of the 1918 election reflected the changed political scenario. Votes were granted to women over 30, and Sinn Féin put forward women for election. We know that Countess Markievicz stood and indeed was elected as a Sinn Féin candidate. But Winifred Carney stood for Parliament as a Sinn Féin candidate for Belfast Victoria Ward in this election. But Carney uncompromisingly held out for a workers' republic. So for a start, that's not going to go down too well in Belfast. But moreover, not only was it a fairly unwinnable seat, She got virtually no support from Sinn Féin in this unionist stronghold. Just a few women from Cumann and some former suffragettes, particularly those who were interested in the situation of women workers. She polled only 4.05% of the vote, and as she put it, I had neither personation agents, committee rooms, canvassers or vehicles. And as these are the chief agents in an election, I was amazed to find that 395 people went to the ballot on their own initiative without any persuasion. The organisation in Belfast could have been much, much better, and that's certainly an understatement. The Ulster Unionists won 25 seats, with 5 going to independent unionists, this ensuring their continuing predominance in the North East. During this period, politicised women on all sides sought to use their newly won influence in defence or opposition to the arrangements set out in the 1920 Government of Ireland Act. The Ulster Women's Unionist Council, for example, lamenting the loss of the 3 counties of Monaghan, Cavan and Donegal. Indeed, they had earlier drawn up a plan to evacuate the women and children of those counties. That came to nothing. But this association utilised its considerable resources in support of the newly created state. In the run-up to the 1921 election, its leaders encouraged the registration of women voters, holding classes for working women to instruct them on the working of the system of PR which was to be used. They promoted male rather than female candidates, explaining the essential thing in the first Parliament was to preserve the safety of the unionist cause, that much organisation and construction work would be necessary, for which perhaps women had not the necessary experience. So male candidates were preferable, except in outstanding cases. This prioritising set the pattern for the future, despite calls from some female pressure groups. There were those who felt that issues such as poor law reform, education, moral reform, child welfare and so forth would be best represented by women, but the choice open to voters was overwhelmingly male. Significantly, the ability of the Ulster Women's Unionist Council to influence newly enfranchised women, from the aristocracy to the Orange Order, was acknowledged in the decision to grant them 12 seats on the all-male Unionist Council in 1920. While the Orange Order itself had a female auxiliary, tended to be somewhat small and marginal in terms of membership, but women's support for this populist aspect of unionist loyalism was well represented at numerous parades and displays. Women on the nationalist side were of course also involved in supporting their political representatives, although the constitutional parties did not actively seek their participation to anything like the same extent, and the policy of abstentionism further minimalised their influence. Diane Urquhart suggests that Cumann suffered disillusion, apathy and discord in the interwar period and was outlawed by the Unionist government in 1922. The Ladies' Auxiliary of the Ancient Order of Hibernians was probably the most popular female nationalist organisation in the North during these years, undergoing something of a revival in Ulster, with 42 of the 219 branches established by 1923 Ladies' Auxiliaries. And indeed, as with unionism, the organisation's attitude to women underwent a significant shift after they attained the vote, and they were much more likely to use their influence. Nationalist female cultural identities also continued to find an outlet through the increasingly popular Gaelic League. But divisions within the wider nationalist movement resulted in a diversity of activities and a less visible female presence than that exerted by loyalism. As a result of the election in May 1921, there were 2 women amongst the 40 unionists elected. Their unionist credentials were, however, sound. Each was a widow of a former unionist MP, and both were active members of the Ulster Women's Unionist Council. Julie McMurdy and Dara Chichester. Again, I'll not go into details about them now. But from its inception, the constitutional partition of the 6 northeastern counties from the remainder of the island was hotly contested. Hostility from the nationalist minority, ensuring that the unionist-dominated government of the North operated in the context of vulnerability. Its authority challenged both within and outside its borders. Women were involved on both sides of the militant activity during the War of Independence. The new constitutional boundaries within which women worked inevitably impacted upon the opportunities open to them and the degree of personal or professional independence that they could aim to achieve. While the background of sectarianism and violent disruption did much to determine social and political boundaries for both male and female citizens, in terms of everyday life, the North was also by no means immune from the post-war economic decline, with the major industries of shipbuilding, construction, and textile all severely affected, and the impact, of course, felt by women as well as men. The need for female representation remained as critical as ever. Ulster society was defensive, conservative, with a strong Protestant evangelical zeal underlying legislation. But a kind of right-wing response to womanhood was clear right across Europe and beyond. Particularly in terms of controlling sexual and moral behaviour, which was of course significantly reinforced by the churches. But while this theory remained intact, in practical terms there was a significant blurring of lines between domestic and public spheres. Moreover, concentration on official roles tends to marginalise women's participation and influence in the wider political sphere. Beneath this dominant discourse of war and sectarian division, and thus much less often the focus of historical attention, a few politicised progressive women continued to raise their voices in support of or in opposition to current events. The earlier suffrage campaign had led to significant international collaboration, which continued to be exercised through pacifist and other cooperative organisations. Recent research also reveals that women played a significant role in party politics at local level. A case study of the North Belfast Labour Party, for example, reveals women leading public meetings, writing articles and forming an active women's guild in efforts to win the support of the working class. And people like Margaret McCoubrey, here we have Ida Boyd, who used to be secretary to Keir Hardie, a very active female socialist presence. And it's interesting that Winifred Carney, Margaret McCoubrey and others were all represented in North Belfast Labour. Clearly too, you had some specifically women's organisations, a Belfast Women's Citizens Union and Advisory Council calling for the selection of candidates to deal with issues relevant to women. Though there is little to be found in the historical records, at least to date, the very existence of these pressure groups suggests that female concern with political inequalities continued to be articulated, and this is consistent with a small number of records relating to individual activists who went on to challenge gender limitations to citizenship through absence or inaccessibility of historical records. I would generally concur with Christopher Shepherd's conclusion that outside the home, women in Northern Ireland, with a few notable exceptions, mainly engaged in traditional activities, more likely than their UK counterparts to be members of religious rather than secular political organisation. But my own research indicates that within these organisations, many women exerted considerable influence, introducing innovations, pushing boundaries, and of course in the pre-welfare state era, their professions, entry into the professions giving them a wider scope. We haven't time to discuss it, but again a piece of research I'm undertaking on the cooperative society again shows a strong strand of left-wing socialist activity going on in Belfast. So while suffragists, nationalists, unionists and pacifist women represented only a small minority, and their words and actions were all too often drowned in the stridency of male-dominated constitutional debates, they were nonetheless destined to inspire future generations of women, either publicly or in private. the defining ones, just some of those faces that have and continue to inspire us. Thank you very much.